A 1994 article in the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology revealed that abortions performed at more than 16 weeks gestation have 15 times the risk of maternal mortality as those performed in the first trimester. And finally, due to the fact that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, rushed RU-486, the so-called abortion pill, onto the market, 3 women at least have died because of this, and others have suffered serious drug-related complications. As a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, I was in Iowa, and I actually talked to one of the doctors who was involved in some of the trials. And he told me a story about a woman who almost bled to death because she took RU-486. And yet, when Planned Parenthood reported on those trials, that story was not included in their research. Now, Planned Parenthood estimates that 43% of women will have abortions before they turn 45 years old. There's more than 1 million abortions every year in the United States. And so this adds up to a significant number of women who have been seriously harmed by abortion. But the other side, the pro-abortion side, they just treat that as collateral damage. Regrettable, but acceptable to maintain a so-called right to abortion. One of the things that people say, well, if you make abortion illegal, it's going to go back to the days before Roe versus Wade, when there were thousands of women dying from illegal abortions. And Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who was a former abortionist who became pro-life, and by the way, he was baptized by Cardinal O'Connor, one of the greatest champions for the unborn. He said of his days in the pro-abortion movement that he just made up figures like 5,000 to 10,000 women dying from illegal abortions. It was totally made up. It was not true. Now, in the year 1972, only 39 women died from illegal abortions. But an additional 24 women died that year from legal abortions that had been weakened, that in states that had been weakened their laws before Roe versus Wade came down. So, as the medical data reveals, more than 3 decades of legal abortion have not made the procedure safer. Women are still dying and suffering serious harm because of abortion. Even an abortionist himself, Warren Hearn, said in his book, Abortion Practice, a leading medical textbook, he said, there are few surgical procedures given so little attention and so underrated in its potential hazard as abortion. Now, it's no wonder now that 81% of women surveyed said they felt victimized by the abortion process, that they were coerced into the abortion, or that information about alternatives or actual procedure had been withheld. I want to tell you another little story that happened to me when I was a parish priest again in Bloomfield, New Jersey. I met another woman who was pregnant by her boyfriend. She was 40 years old. She was engaged to be married to this man, who was now breaking up with her and getting married to someone else. And he didn't want to pay child support. And so he was pressuring her. He called her every day. He wrote her a blank check that he expected her to use to have an abortion. And she thought that the best way to go on with her life would be to have an abortion. But I talked to her over the course of a week. I wasn't sure what she was going to do. I gave her some information about the stages of development of the unborn child. I talked about how abortion would harm her. I talked to her about how she would have to live with the memory of this for the rest of her life. Finally, I took her to a hospital where she saw her baby on an ultrasound. Not the clear color ultrasounds that we have these days, where you see the baby smiling and even jumping around and so forth. It was a grainy picture. But when she saw that baby, when she saw the heartbeat, she couldn't go through with an abortion. And she gave birth to a little baby boy whose name is Daniel. And she wrote me an email last year to tell me that Daniel is now 15 years old. He's 5'9", 185 pounds, with red hair, freckles, and blue eyes. And he loves to play with his video games, and he loves to play with his friends. She also tells me he's quite a student as well. He studies 3 hours a day. Imagine that? The electric guitar, that is. But at least he's studying something. If he uses it for the glory of God, maybe he can be in the band here, you know? But you know, sometimes we forget, behind the statistics are real people like Daniel. Who, you know, real people who live, real people who die. And real women who are being pressured. Often, you know, 64% of women say that they're pressured into an abortion. And oftentimes it's by the man, as in the case, in many of the cases I've been involved in, cases where I've been able to convince a woman not to go through with a planned abortion. It's men who are doing the pressuring. Oftentimes it's a parent. Oftentimes it's a Catholic parent, as I said before. You know, it's people who are embarrassed to let people in their church know that they have a daughter who's pregnant, or grandparents who don't want to help to raise their grandchild. But that's exactly what they're doing when they contribute to abortion. They're really helping to kill their grandchild. But you know, one of the greatest supporters of abortion in the United States today is the Playboy Foundation, because abortion allows men to use women as playthings, to be discarded, and as they're done with their pleasures. Now, it's true that some men do not consent to the abortions of their wives and girlfriends, and they have no legal rights in the abortion decision in the United States. But other men serve as catalysts. 40% of post-abortive women in one study reported that their partners pressured them into having an abortion. And so, Elizabeth Fox Genovese, who is a professor at Emory University, said the most enthusiastic supporters of abortion have been men, at least until they have children of their own. So it's the woman that has to live with the possible short-term and long-term medical consequences of the abortion for the rest of her life. Now, there is a new wave of feminism now. The study showed that women are still perplexed about how to combine career and family. Abortion usurped a pioneering feminism that sought to influence society to recognize the distinct dignity of women. In doing so, it forestalled solutions to the question of how women could fulfill their unique role as mothers while participating in the wider society. A lot of people don't know, but that the original feminists in the United States who fought for women's right to vote, for example, for their inheritance rights and all sorts of legitimate rights that women must have, they were pro-life. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, for example, who began the women's rights movement more than 150 years ago, she said, if we consider that women are often treated as property by men, it's degrading for women that they should treat their unborn children as property to be disposed of as they see fit. Susan B. Anthony, one of the pioneering feminists, was very much pro-life, and she had very strong words to say about abortion. But she said also that the man who got the woman into the situation in the first place, that he was 3 times as much responsible. Now, true feminism respects the dignity of women and the vocation of motherhood. It doesn't create a false dichotomy in which the woman is told you have to choose between the baby and yourself, your baby and your future, your baby and your success. They're told this is a man's world, and you better become like a man that is not pregnant if you want to succeed. Today, more women are challenging this pro-abortion feminism. That the idea that their children are a burden to their success or their equality. Ordinary women want to be honored as women, not to have to sacrifice their children for equality with men. Women are beginning to realize that they've been sold on the idea that a mother is far less valued than a fully engaged professional person. And during an era in which motherhood was revered much more than it is today, President Theodore Roosevelt said, "The mother is the most indispensable component of society. The work of men," he said, "is not as hard or as responsible as the work of women, who is bringing up a family of small children." I think the duty of the woman, the more important, the more difficult, and the more honorable of the two. So also, pro-abortion feminism has led to the feminization of poverty. It has driven unprecedented numbers of women with small children into the workforce full-time the last few decades. Now, single mothers today have more trouble making ends meet. The new norm today is the dual-income family, which has driven up the prices of life's necessities. While the 2-parent families with a single income struggle and sacrifice to allow one parent to remain at home with young children, single mothers, responsible both for breadwinning and child rearing, have a far more challenging task. But pro-abortion feminists have an answer to this poverty they helped to create. They say that government needs to pay for abortions for poor women. And not only that, they want the rich countries to pay for abortion overseas in places like the Philippines and tie much needed aid for food and medicines to the acceptance of population control programs that include abortion, contraception, and sterilization. Americans' reliance on abortion has relieved our culture of the costs associated with creating environments truly hospitable to women and their children. If a nation as rich as ours were truly committed to women's well-being and equality, we would look for real solutions to the underlying causes of abortion, including the serious challenge of women balancing work or school or family, the disrespect for motherhood, the feminization of poverty, and society's eugenic distaste for the imperfection and the vulnerability of the disabled. But, you know, I think the tide is turning. A good 75%, or perhaps up to 80% of Americans disagree with the reasons that underlie 95% of the abortions. Only about 1/5 of Americans believe that abortion should be legal at any time during the pregnancy and for any reason. And that, because of Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton, is currently the law of the land. But there is hope. There is hope. Groups like Couples for Christ and Priests for Life promote, support, and defend the family and the sanctity of life and the true dignity of women. We proclaim